While 2020 was the year when a decade happened, 2021 has been the year when the world began to get back on its feet and find new direction within the emerging realities that COVID-19 thrust on it. In the second year of the world living with COVID-19, humans have shown remarkable resilience in adapting to these new realities. By all accounts, however, it has been a tough year, wiggling out of the rubble of economic dips, job losses, political instabilities, successful elections, coups and counter-coups. In this report, we discuss a few of these events of international significance, covering a range of issues from the economy, politics, security, and natural disasters. Emerging from the dark depths of shutdowns, layoffs, lockdowns, and isolation in 2020, 2021 was supposed to be the year of hope, of some kind. It did its best with some uncomfortable caveats. While the preponderance of vaccinations across the world helped forge a path back to global growth, the spatial concentration of the distributions eerily mirrored the sharp contours of geopolitics and geoeconomics. How global powers of all shapes and sizes managed the transition to a post-COVID-19 paradigm will reveal important clues as to the state of the world and any emerging dynamics. Nigeria's economy, like most economies around the world, saw some recovery from pandemic-induced and policy-enabled shocks, but it has been insufficient to assure price stability, support wage growth, enhance food security, make a significant dent in unemployment, or reverse rising poverty. Coupled with rising security threats in every region, gang attacks in the northwest, a reinvigorated insurgency in the northeast, and low-level armed confrontations in the southeast being the prominent cause of at least 9,500 Nigerian deaths this year, and political instability, 2021 represented another lost opportunity for policymakers to make much-needed headway in confronting the country's growing social and economic challenges. Developments on the continent left a lot to be desired. Coups took center stage in every region save for the South. Less than 2 years into the third decade of the 21st century, there have been 7 coups already. In all of the 2000s, there were 13. Disaffected elements in politically stressed countries, from palace overthrows in Guinea, Mali, and Sudan to democratic erosion in Ethiopia and Tunisia, are increasingly choosing a discredited tool of political change. Rebellion in the Horn of Africa, sectarian violence in Central Africa, insurgency in Southern Africa, bomb attacks in East Africa, and the Islamic State's strategic inroads mean leaders across the continent will be forced to contend with the middling economic returns that have accompanied decades of democratic governance. The defining issue of the human race over the rest of the century will be the climate crisis, and Africa is squarely in the firing line. Save for island countries around the world, the continent will be the most impacted. Erratic weather patterns, a climate change-enhanced La Niña, and inadequate mitigation measures have led to debilitating locust infestations, crop failures, droughts, and supercharged resource competition. COP26 failed in meeting most of its lofty aims, although it laid the outlines of a carbon market, and with the return of renewed big power competition, Africans must seize the mantle in evolving homegrown solutions or risk being a geopolitical dumping ground for fancy initiatives. Coming back home, 2022 is officially not an election year, but the political elite's favorite rat race will mean that electoral calculations, permutations, and projections will dominate the airwaves and commentary. Historically low voter turnout, however, in key local council elections across the election and the only off-cycle state vote in 2020, Anambra, shows the electorate is not as psyched up. Africa's largest democracy is head deep in a crisis of legitimacy, and if history is any guide, popular dissatisfaction is a precursor to the erosion of democracy itself. 2022 will be a seminal year in showing if Nigeria can maintain this 2-decade-plus democratic run. At the end of every year, SBM makes projections of what we think will take place in Nigeria during the coming year. While the prophecy business is not an exact science, our record this far has been good. For 2021, we got 25 correct, 2 partially correct, and 5 wrong. 2021 held the promise of jump-starting a transition from a time when the world literally stood still, but ultimately delivered little more than a faint kick. Will 2022 pick up the gauntlet? It's anyone's guess. The year ahead. Our 2022 predictions for Nigeria. The economy. Nigeria's 5.01% and 4.03% growth rates experienced in Q2 2021 and Q3 2021 signify that the country can outperform the World Bank GDP growth forecast of 1.8% in 2021. Regarding 2022, we envisage strong GDP growth due to several factors, including oil price, oil production, expansion of financial services due to the MMO licenses issued to the telcos, and most importantly, an increase in FG spending due to the approaching election year. We project a 2.0% to 2.5% growth rate for the full year 2022. We forecast that oil prices will hover around $75 to $85 per barrel for much of 2022, despite continued disruption of economic activities due to COVID-19. The cautious OPEC Plus supply increase and faster than expected inventory drawdown will be the major factors for oil price strength. Nigeria's public debt and debt service ratio will continue to increase as the country will fail to meet its revenue targets for 2021 and 2022. To bridge the gap, the FG will continue on its borrowing binge. Rising inflation in the U.S. and other G20 markets due to stimulus spending will lead central banks to raise interest rates. This will make foreign investors demand more returns for emerging markets. We expect market interest rates to rise by Q2, which will have consequences on the FG's borrowing and debt profile. Also, local investors will find the Nigerian stock market less appealing once the Q1 earnings and dividends season is over. The Naira will face various pull forces during the year. On one hand, foreign currency borrowing and increased crude oil revenues will keep the foreign reserves above $35 billion and give the CBN some ammunition to defend the Naira. However, increased demand from politicians mopping up dollars ahead of the elections, foreign investors seeking to repatriate their funds ahead of the elections, and manufacturers seeking to import materials will be the main demand drivers. Thus, we expect some devaluation of the official IEW to about $1 to 450 Naira. We expect that states and the federal government will reach a political settlement of the VAT impasse that will see the states receive more of what they generate, but the FG will continue to collect. Inflation growth rate should continue to drop through Q1 2021. However, high base effect, election spending, food inflation from insecurity, and further tightening of imports by the CBN will cause inflation growth rate to begin to rise again by Q3. The expected fuel subsidy replacements with a direct transfer of 5,000 Naira monthly to subsidize the poor on transport is unlikely to take off, as Nigeria will be unable to afford this expense in its current fiscal trajectory. We expect the passage of a startup bill, which will be the omnibus regulation for the tech and digital innovation industry in the country. We expect an increase in regulatory and tax-based fines in 2022 as the government seeks to extract from the corporate sector to fill some of its fiscal shortfalls and fund spending. Consumer spending power will remain subdued as there is no likely widespread increase in wages in sight. Spending on luxury items will fall as consumers will likely adjust their spending habits in order to ration meager resources. Security. There will be increased organizing by groups into armed vigilante groups to defend themselves from bandit, pastoralist, and kidnapping attacks. The election year will see the flow of small arms into these groups, increasing clashes across the country. Terrorists will begin to strike more frequently in the bigger urban centers in the north, including the federal capital Abuja, as an influx of hardened fighters from neighboring Sahel countries such as Burkina Faso and Mali will swell the numbers of terrorists in the region. As these terrorists become established in rural, ungoverned spaces with a semblance of their own versions of a state, controlling dispensation of justice, extracting taxation, and supervising trade and agriculture, they will fight brutal internal battles to consolidate control, and these groups will then be emboldened to take on bigger targets. The military will institute a garrison town strategy in the northwest, similar to what obtains in Borno, where they secure specific urban centers and leave much of the surrounding countryside and roads to the control of the terrorists. The southwest of the country will see a ramp up in gang activities, some of which will assume the toga of secessionist agitation. We expect a crime wave to hit the region from mid-year. The Southwest will see an increase in political violence as various groups jockey for political influence as the relationship between Lagos and Abuja deteriorates. The military will step up its campaign in the Southeast with unnecessary brutality, galvanizing even more support for the separatist movements in the region. We think a more organized movement than IPOB will begin to emerge in 2022 and will link up with militants in the Niger Delta. As more oil majors divest from their onshore assets, Nigeria will see an increase in oil spills, and this will reinvigorate militancy in the Niger Delta. This will hamper Nigeria's ability to take advantage of the high oil prices to ramp up production. Politics. Elections in Osun State and Ekiti State will be the real start of the 2023 elections. In Ekiti, the governor will not be on the ballot. We expect the APC to lose Ekiti State to the PDP. In Osun State, however, with the incumbent governor on the ballot, it will be a close-fought battle due to the political infighting in the APC structure in the state. But we expect the APC to just edge it. The two main parties will field candidates that are the direct opposites of the other in terms of the region of origin, with the APC waiting to see who the PDP fields before reacting. Unlike going into the 2019 elections where the incumbent president was on the ballot, he will not be returning in spite of tepid attempts to moot a third term. Therefore, defection from the APC is unlikely to be a strategy employed by politicians this time. We will therefore not see a rash of defections out of the APC like we did in 2019. Rather, there will be defections into the APC, as politicians will conclude that the real battle is winning the APC presidential ticket. We expect a rash of corruption arrests and trials in 2022 as political opponents seek to neutralize rivals. The AGF will be particularly active in pursuing these, but we expect a coalition to rise, which will ultimately see him out of office before the elections. We expect Nnamdi Kanu to be released before or during Q3 as a political compromise is reached. We expect to see a rejuvenation of the civil society space as the elections galvanize these groups into action once again. There is likely to be a CSO-led protest against socioeconomic hardships around inflation and cost of living, but this will serve the purpose of putting the government on notice of this reawakening after the relative tameness of CSOs in the Buhari years. International sanctions on the basis of documented massacres will be instituted against named Nigerian government agents. The government will lift the ban on Twitter in time for the campaign season to kick off. The government will continue to clamp down on press freedoms. At the subnational level, more state governors will come under more pressure as economic failings begin to make more people question the use of state government funds. Our predictions for the rest of Africa: the Democratic Republic of Congo. Renewed activities by Islamic State-affiliated cells within the country, as well as parts of East Africa, will resurrect old wounds and raise the possibility of renewed conflict and political instability. The unpopular Security Cooperation Pact with Uganda, announced in November 2021, will lead to populist political discontent, attract the participation of equally unpopular Rwanda, and sow the seeds of multi-state military activities. It could ultimately cost President Felix Tshisekedi his job, either by constitutional or extra-legal means. Ethiopia. The war of the central government of Ethiopia with the Tigrayan forces would continue well into 2022 and spread to other regions. As the war persists, it would spark a wider humanitarian crisis and put renewed stress on the various political compromises holding the country's autonomous regions, as well as Addis Ababa's relationship with old foe Eritrea. Mozambique. The Islamic State's focus on northern Mozambique will invite renewed foreign military support as attacks on infrastructure projects persist. A multinational regional coalition supported by Western powers will complement Rwanda's current efforts at supporting Maputo in ending the three-year-old crisis. Sahelian West Africa. Russia and Turkey's involvement in critical Sahelian countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Chad, will morph into full security support and cooperation pacts as French and Western strategic withdrawal persist. Notwithstanding, France will maintain a residual security presence, chiefly in Niger, and as historical concerns in the region outweigh domestic political priorities. The Sahel will heat up as an arena of geopolitical competition between great powers over the course of the year. More coups. In 2021, Africa saw a few successful coups. As we go into 2022, we expect that more coups will take place, especially in countries where political stressors, economic downturn, inflation, unemployment, and other critical social factors collide. Travel restrictions for African countries. With the recent detection of the Omicron variant of COVID-19, a variant that preliminary research indicates has a higher reinfection rate and a different spike protein from the one vaccines are designed for, we are likely to see the world shut its doors to more African countries.